Democrat ploy, deflect attention from every single thing that he described about affordability being caused by their policies, and then turning around and attempting to blame us for the problems that they created with the housing, the increase in housing.
This may look like another partisan clash over economic pressure, but it's actually a deeper test of how accountability functions inside Congress. What's really being tested here is whether lawmakers will own the long-term consequences of policy decisions or continue to shift responsibility when outcomes become politically inconvenient. This raises broader questions about how power is exercised, how oversight is enforced, and whether institutional memory still matters when citizens feel squeezed from every direction. In this video, we'll break down how affordability became a proxy battle for trust in governance, and what this exchange reveals about Congress's ability to correct itself.
And cut you off, but not till you had your full 5 minutes.
And I appreciate my placing on the committee for
today. And Ms. Bondi is coming. She was scheduled, and then we had this 43-day, month-and-a-half shutdown by the Democrats, so she wasn't able to be here. So we'll.
And then the speaker furloughed us for 45 days. I had never been furloughed before, by the way.
We will.
Okay.
We will have her. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Classic Democrat ploy, deflect attention from every single thing that he described about affordability being caused by their policies, and then turning around and attempting to blame us for the problems that they created with the housing, the increase in housing costs, the increasing in food costs. We're fixing those things, the policies that they implemented, and I have every expectation that we will see a decline in some of those prices next year. But I actually want to talk about why we're here today, because it is a very important hearing. I have long been a proponent for including sunsets in government programs and authorities, and I believe we commit legislative malpractice in a lot of the things that we do when we don't include sunsets. I hold this principle to be especially true when dealing with technology and technological advances, which always seem to move much faster than government, and we can evolve when we're drafting our bills. FISA is a perfect example of this issue. Since its creation in 1978, the scope of FISA authorities has continually grown, as has its abuses. As the intelligence agencies we oversee push their surveillance abilities beyond these statutory allowances, that issue today is compounded by new technologies and the commercial availability of data. Today, we as legislators face two unique challenges. First, reforming Section 702 to correct past abuses, which for some appears to be a controversial exercise in and of itself, although I don't see that as to why it should be controversial. But second, we also need to update federal laws and protections to account for the pace of technological advancement. And here we are. We're actually talking about and working on reforms with a chance to vote on those reforms in 2026 for the second time in my 2 terms in Congress, which I think is a really good deal. Why? Because Congress was wise enough to sunset these important authorities to aid in our ability to consistently review them. Mr. Chernisky, technological advancement and the private sector always seem to move faster than the government. Does maintaining these 2-year reauthorizations of Section 702 provide a better chance for us to keep up with the pace of those changes and also to address any new violations that we may see?
Thank you for the question, Representative. And I think that sunsets on a shorter time frame are an amazing tool for you and this committee, more broadly speaking, to assert its authority and its oversight function over these critical agencies. We want them to be able to go and do their national security mission to keep this country safe. But at the same time, as you documented it, as these witnesses have documented, there's a litany of abuses that FISA has enabled. And what better way to make sure that that is on the decline, if not hopefully ideally eliminated, than by having these shorter reauthorization periods.
And I've been an advocate for the warrant requirement and some of the other changes that we have made, some of the other modernization and the safeguards that we've put in place. You've been asked an awful lot of questions today. What I'd like each of you briefly to do is to describe for us, if you see any other reforms that we should be making when we revisit this in April of next year. Mr. Tolman, starting with you, have we touched on all of your proposed changes, or do you have additional ideas that you would like us to consider?
With respect to 702, we have addressed them, but with the FBI, I think we have work to do. I think shifting their mission back to interdiction of drug and violent crime should be their central focus and not the gathering of intelligence. And until then, we will see abuses that we have to rein in.
Just very quickly, I don't know if you were aware, but at the beginning of the 118th Congress, when we were doing the Select Committee on Weaponization of the Federal Government, we had a former FBI agent who came and testified, and he talked about how the mission had been shifted after 9/11, and I think you touched on that briefly today as well, and I agree with you. We need to get back to a pre-9/11 mentality with regard to the FBI. I think it's important, and I appreciate your advice in that regard. Mr. Scher.
Thank you for the question. If I could add one thing to the 4 specific reforms that I mentioned earlier, I would add the NGO Fairness Act, which I know this committee has already passed and reported out, but perhaps that could be attached as part of the 702 reauthorization bill, because it's certainly closely related to the items in that bill. So I would suggest adding that.
Thank you. Mr. Chinarsky?
Yes, I would second Mr. Scher's point of adding the NDO Fairness Act into that and everything else, the 4 core ones that we mentioned too.
Thank you. And Ms. Goitine?
If there was one thing I would add to those 4 things, which I agree with, it would be closing the backdoor search loophole for Executive Order 12333 collection.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
What just unfolded in this hearing was not a passing exchange or a throwaway partisan jab. It was a moment that peeled back layers of how power is defended, redirected, and preserved in Washington. When Representative Harriet Hageman cut through the noise and called it a classic Democrat ploy, she wasn't merely scoring a rhetorical point. She was identifying a pattern that has become familiar to anyone watching Congress closely. Redirect blame, change the subject, and avoid accountability for policies whose consequences are now impossible to ignore. The exchange began with affordability. Housing costs rising, food prices climbing, families feeling squeezed from every direction. Hageman argued that these pressures did not appear out of thin air, nor were they accidents of fate. She pointed directly to policy choices, to decisions made and defended in this very building, and to the political instinct to shift responsibility once those choices collide with reality. In that moment, the hearing stopped being abstract. It became personal. Because affordability is not a theory. It is rent due every month. It is a grocery bill that no longer fits within a paycheck. It is the quiet erosion of stability that millions feel long before it ever shows up in official statistics. But Hageman did not stay on the surface. She pivoted, deliberately, to the deeper reason the committee was there. And in doing so, she exposed something far more consequential than partisan disagreement. She spoke about sunsets in government authority, about the idea that power granted by Congress should never be permanent, especially when technology moves faster than the laws meant to restrain it. That principle alone stands in sharp contrast to how Washington usually operates. Programs expand, authorities grow, oversight fades, and what begins as a temporary measure quietly becomes a permanent fixture of governance. Her focus on FISA was not accidental. Since its creation decades ago, the scope of surveillance authorities has steadily widened. With each reauthorization, the promise is reform, restraint, and responsibility. And with each cycle, reports surface showing overreach, misuse, and systems stretched far beyond what lawmakers originally intended. The witnesses acknowledged this reality openly. They did not deny the pattern. They confirmed it. Abuse enabled by vague authority. Oversight weakened by complexity. Accountability delayed until the next scheduled review, if it comes at all. What made this moment especially revealing was the agreement across the table. Shorter reauthorization periods, stronger safeguards, real consequences for violations. These were not radical ideas in this room. They were presented as practical tools for Congress to reassert its role, to remind powerful agencies that authority flows from the people, not the other way around. When a witness described sunsets as an amazing tool for oversight, it underscored a quiet truth. Without constant pressure, even well-intentioned systems drift toward excess. The discussion around technological advancement sharpened that truth even further. Data moves instantly. Capabilities evolve faster than statutes can be amended. And yet, government often operates as if time itself is on its side. It is not. Every delay creates space for new loopholes. Every broad authorization becomes an invitation for expansion. And every failure to adapt the law becomes an excuse to push boundaries rather than respect them. Perhaps the most sobering moment came when the conversation turned to institutional mission drift. The idea that agencies can slowly transform their focus without explicit approval should concern anyone who believes in constitutional balance. When oversight committees hear testimony acknowledging that missions have shifted, not by vote, but by habit, it raises a fundamental question. Who is steering the system? Elected representatives accountable to voters, or permanent structures accountable only to themselves? Throughout this hearing, one theme echoed beneath the procedural language and policy references. Trust. Trust in government is not lost all at once. It erodes incrementally. Each deflection, each justification, each promise of reform deferred to a later date. When citizens hear leaders argue about affordability while avoiding responsibility, when they watch oversight reduced to ritual rather than enforcement, they draw their own conclusions. And those conclusions shape how they see the entire system. This is why moments like this matter, not because one side landed a sharper line, but because the exchange revealed the mechanics of power in real time. It showed how blame is reassigned, how authority expands unless actively constrained, how reforms are always described as urgent and yet endlessly postponed. And it reminded us that the cost of inaction is not abstract. It is paid by people whose lives are shaped by decisions made far from their kitchens and living rooms. As the gavel fell and the hearing moved on, nothing was resolved. No prices dropped. No authority was suddenly restrained. But something important happened nonetheless. The record was set, the arguments were made, and the responsibility now rests where it always has, with those elected to act, not to delay. A system that cannot question itself will eventually justify anything. A government that resists sunsets resists accountability. And a political culture that treats deflection as strategy risks losing the public it claims to serve. The future will judge whether these warnings were heeded or ignored. If you believe moments like this deserve more than a passing headline, if you think power should be examined, not excused, then stay with us. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work as we continue to follow the hearings, expose the patterns, and shine light where it matters most.